This story is named How I Uninvited My Best Friend from My Husband's Surprise Party and Discovered the Truth About Her Intentions. Looking back, I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. Maybe it was denial, or maybe I was so used to brushing things aside that I convinced myself they didn't matter. But the signs were there, woven into small moments, disguised as harmless coincidences. And now, standing in the aftermath of it all, I realized I had been ignoring the truth for far too long. Trina and I had been inseparable since high school, our friendship spanning nearly 2 decades of life, changes, breakups, and personal struggles. She had always been the wild one, the friend who never settled down, who floated from relationship to relationship, always searching for something just out of reach. Meanwhile, I had taken the safer route, committing early to James, the man who would become my husband. Over time, Trina became part of our world, blending effortlessly into our lives. She had been there for every milestone, our engagement, our wedding, our anniversaries. And yet, somewhere along the way, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, too subtle for me to acknowledge it for what it was. It started last year when we took a short trip for her birthday. Just the three of us, James, Trina, and me. At the time, I thought nothing of the way she carried herself around him, her laughter a little too loud, her gaze lingering a little too long. Trina had always been confident, unapologetically so, but there was a new energy to her presence, a calculated effort to insert herself into spaces that weren't meant for her. She would strut around the house in revealing outfits, drape herself across the couch in ways that demanded attention, and find excuses to position herself near James. She was playful, lighthearted, the kind of woman who had always thrived on being noticed, but for the first time, I felt uncomfortable. James, oblivious as ever, didn't notice at first, but I did. And once I started paying attention, I realized it wasn't just in my head. The moment that shattered my trust came when James and I had one of the worst fights of our marriage. It was about money, about an old mistake he had made when we were younger, something I thought we had moved past. The argument had left me feeling hurt, betrayed, desperate for someone to talk to. And as always, I turned to Trina. I vented to her, poured out my frustrations, expecting comfort. And at first, she reacted exactly as I thought she would. Shocked, sympathetic, agreeing with me. But later, I found out she had sent James a text behind my back. "She knows how you can be," she wrote. "You always overreact." That single sentence cracked something inside me. Still, I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, tried to convince myself I was reading too much into things. But then came New Year's Eve. Every year, Trina and I had a tradition of sending each other long, heartfelt messages at midnight, a ritual that had always meant something to me. This year, I waited, checking my phone, expecting the usual warmth. Nothing. At 1 a.m., I finally gave in and sent her a message, pouring my heart into it, wishing her the best for the new year. Her response? A cold, dismissive "thanks, likewise." And yet, while she had barely acknowledged me, she had sent James a message filled with sentiment, accompanied by a picture of a lotus flower for luck, starting with "my dearest." That was it. That was the moment I knew. I replayed every interaction, every lingering glance, every moment I had excused. The truth was undeniable. She wasn't just being friendly. She wasn't just being thoughtless. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push, how much she could get away with. And now, with James's surprise birthday party just days away, I knew with absolute certainty that I didn't want her there. She had been invited weeks ago, before my suspicions had solidified into something real. But now, the idea of her standing in my home, pretending to be my friend, circling James like a vulture waiting for an opportunity, it made my stomach twist. I had to uninvite her, but part of me hesitated. I wasn't a confrontational person. The idea of calling her, of saying the words out loud, of acknowledging the reality of the situation, it made my throat tighten with anxiety. What if I was wrong? What if I was making something out of nothing? No, not this time. For the first time in a long time, I needed to choose myself. The realization that I no longer wanted Trina at the party settled in my mind like a heavy stone, pressing down with each passing hour. It wasn't just discomfort anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt like betrayal, like the slow unraveling of a connection I had once trusted without hesitation. For years, I had welcomed her into my life, into my home, into the spaces of my marriage where friendship and trust should have been sacred. And yet, here I was, faced with the undeniable truth that she had been pushing the boundaries of that trust, inching closer to something that was never hers to claim. But the question lingered in my mind, gnawing at me with relentless persistence. How do you uninvite someone who has woven themselves so deeply into the fabric of your life? How do you stand in front of a person who has been there for nearly 2 decades and tell them that something has shifted, that something has broken, that they no longer belong in the same way they once did? I rehearsed the conversation in my mind, playing out different scenarios, each one ending with the same inevitable confrontation. Would she act surprised, feigning confusion, insisting that I was imagining things? Would she laugh it off, pretending it was all in good fun, dismissing my concerns as jealousy or insecurity? Or worse, would she finally drop the act and let me see the truth that I had been avoiding for far too long? I thought about sending a message instead, typing out the words, erasing them, rewriting them, only to find myself staring at a blank screen, unable to press send. It felt cowardly, like a poor attempt at avoiding the weight of the conversation. But the alternative, sitting across from her, looking into her eyes, forcing myself to acknowledge the shift in our dynamic, felt unbearable. And then, as if the universe had decided for me, the moment arrived without warning. Trina reached out first, sending me a casual message about the party, asking if I needed help with anything, if I wanted her to come over early to set up. I stared at my phone, my pulse quickening, my hands tightening around the device as if the weight of the decision had suddenly become tangible. This was it, the moment where I had to choose whether to maintain the illusion of our friendship or finally admit that it was falling apart. I took a deep breath, feeling the rise and fall of my chest, steadying myself before typing a response that felt both foreign and freeing. I told her there had been a change of plans, that I had decided to keep the party small, just family and a few close friends, that things had been overwhelming lately, and I needed to simplify. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. It was a bridge between confrontation and avoidance, a way to create distance without setting everything on fire. The response came quickly, almost too quickly, as if she had been waiting for something like this, as if she had sensed the shift before I had even put it into words. She responded with a simple clipped, "Oh, okay." No questions, no arguments, no attempts to push back. Just 2 words, hollow and final. But the silence that followed was louder than any confrontation could have been. The absence of her usual energy, the lack of insistence, the ease with which she accepted the unspoken truth, it all felt like confirmation of something I had been too afraid to acknowledge. If she had truly been oblivious, if she had genuinely believed there was nothing wrong, wouldn't she have asked why? Wouldn't she have tried to understand, to fight for our friendship, to defend herself? Instead, she let it go. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. The following days passed in a blur of preparation, each detail of the party a welcome distraction from the weight of my decision. I busied myself with decorations, finalizing the menu, ensuring every piece of the evening would come together perfectly. But beneath the surface, a quiet unease remained, a lingering doubt that whispered in the back of my mind. Had I done the right thing? Had I overreacted? Was I letting my emotions dictate something that didn't need to be severed so completely? But then, I would remember the way she had looked at James, the way she had dismissed my feelings, the way she had reached out to him in moments when she should have been standing by me instead. And with each reminder, the doubt faded, replaced by the certainty that I had spent far too long making excuses for someone who had stopped being my friend long before I had the courage to admit it. The night of the party arrived, and with it, a sense of relief. James was happy, surrounded by the people who mattered most, laughter filling the room, the weight of the past few weeks lifting with each passing moment. But even in that joy, there was an emptiness, a space where Trina should have been, a presence I had expected to miss more than I actually did. And as I watched James, his eyes meeting mine across the room, warmth and love evident in every glance, I realized that I'd made the right choice. Some friendships aren't meant to last forever. Some people are meant to be a part of your past, not your future. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is to finally let go. First update. For the first time in years, my life felt quieter without Trina in it. No daily texts, no casual invitations, no last-minute calls asking if she could stop by just to chat. At first, I thought I would feel a sense of loss, maybe even regret. Instead, all I felt was relief, a weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying slowly lifting from my shoulders. But just when I thought I had finally drawn the line and moved on, she reached out again. The message was short, too short for someone who had been such an integral part of my life for 2 decades. She wanted to meet for coffee. No explanations, no accusations, just a simple request. I should have ignored it. I should have let the silence remain, allowed the separation to stand as the quiet goodbye it had already become. But something inside me, maybe habit, maybe curiosity, maybe a need for closure I didn't even realize I wanted, made me agree. So the next day, I found myself sitting at a small coffee shop in the city where she lived, fingers curled around a cup of tea I hadn't taken a sip from, watching the door with the kind of nervous anticipation I hated admitting to. When she finally arrived, walking in as if nothing had changed, all smiles and light chatter, greeting me with the same casual energy she always had, I felt my stomach twist. She handed me a small bag, a souvenir from a recent trip she had taken, a box of chocolates for James, and for me, something that made my skin crawl the moment I saw it. A tube of pheromone-infused lip gloss and a set of flavored lubricants, accompanied by a wink and a comment that if James was suddenly all over me, I would know why. I stared at the items, my grip tightening around them, trying to make sense of whether this was some kind of joke, a poorly thought-out attempt at humor, or something more. And for the first time, I didn't brush it off. I didn't let it slide. Instead, I met her gaze, steadied my voice, and told her everything. The way she had been making me feel, the way her actions had crossed boundaries she had no right to cross, the way her presence around James had shifted from friendly to predatory in a way I could no longer ignore. I laid it all out, every observation, every moment that had made my stomach twist with discomfort, every boundary she had overstepped without hesitation. And then I watched her reaction. She didn't deny it, not really. The first thing she asked wasn't why I felt that way or how she had hurt me. It was whether James had blocked her because I had forced him to. There was no concern for our friendship, no sadness, no regret. Just frustration that her access to him had been cut off. When I told her James had made that decision on his own, she scoffed, shaking her head, telling me I was insecure, that if I truly trusted him, I wouldn't be so threatened by her. But that was the thing. I did trust James. I trusted him completely. It was her I didn't trust. And as she sat there, scrambling to defend herself, throwing out thinly veiled insults about my self-worth, about my ability to hold on to my own husband, about how she had only ever been helping by pointing out his flaws, I felt something settle deep in my chest. I was done. For years, I had let things slide. I had ignored the small red flags, the dismissive remarks, the way she always managed to center herself in my life in ways I had never invited her to. But now, staring at the person she had become, or maybe had always been, I saw her for what she was. Not a friend. Not even a loss, just someone I no longer needed. So I stood up, leaving the ridiculous gifts on the table, meeting her gaze one last time as I told her, with more certainty than I had ever spoken with before, that we were done. And for the first time in 20 years, I walked away. Second update. Walking away from that coffee shop should have felt like the end of something, like the final chapter in a story that had gone on far longer than it should have. And yet, as I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, feeling the cold air press against my skin, I realized that endings are rarely as clean as we want them to be. Even as I had left her sitting there, staring after me in stunned silence, I knew, deep down, that this wasn't truly over. Not yet. A part of me had hoped she would take my words for what they were. A final, undeniable statement that I was done, that whatever had once existed between us had withered beyond repair. But people like Trina don't let go easily, not when they have spent years building their presence into the foundation of someone else's life. They don't disappear quietly, don't bow out gracefully, don't accept the shifting tides without trying, at least once, to claw their way back into the spaces they've been shut out of. And so, I wasn't surprised when, later that evening, my phone lit up with messages, one after another, her name flashing across the screen like an echo of the past refusing to be ignored. I didn't read them at first. I didn't have to. I already knew what they would say, veiled justifications, manipulative attempts at reframing the narrative, accusations wrapped in the illusion of concern. I could picture the words before I even saw them, the way she would try to spin it, how she would claim that I had overreacted, that I had misunderstood her, that I was throwing away a friendship over nothing. But nothing doesn't feel like betrayal. Nothing doesn't leave a bitter taste in the back of your throat, doesn't make your stomach twist with unease, doesn't force you to question every moment leading up to it. Nothing doesn't linger in the spaces between thoughts, creeping in when you least expect it. And so for the first time in 20 years, I ignored her. I didn't reply. I didn't try to argue. I didn't try to explain myself any further because the truth was, I no longer owed her an explanation. I had said everything that needed to be said, and anything beyond that would be giving her something she didn't deserve. Another chance to manipulate, to twist my words, to make herself the victim in a story where she had never been the one wronged. But Trina, true to form, didn't stop there. It started with her trying to reach me through different platforms, sending messages through social media, leaving voice notes filled with emotion, each one shifting in tone as she tried different approaches. First pleading, then anger, then an eerie sort of indifference, as if she wanted me to believe she didn't care, that she wasn't affected by any of it. And when that didn't work, she did what I should have seen coming from the very beginning. She tried to drag James into it. The next morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and feeling the first real sense of peace I had had in weeks, James walked in, his expression unreadable as he slid his phone across the table toward me. And there it was, her name, her words, the last desperate attempt to wedge herself between us. She had written to him under the guise of concern, pretending that she was reaching out because she cared, because she was worried about me, because she wanted to make sure I wasn't isolating myself over some misunderstanding. She framed it as if she was the reasonable one, the mature one, the one trying to salvage something I had recklessly thrown away. But beneath the carefully crafted sentences, the true intention was glaringly obvious. She wanted to plant a seed of doubt, to make him question me, to make him wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had a point. But James had never been a fool. Without hesitation, without even a flicker of doubt, he'd blocked her the moment he saw the message, his actions firm, decisive, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And as I looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of lingering uncertainty, I found none. There was only clarity, only certainty, only the unwavering knowledge that he had never once been tempted by whatever game she had been playing. And in that moment, I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had never had to worry about him. Trina had lost, not just in the way she had failed to insert herself between us, but in a much deeper, much sadder way. She had lost the illusion she had built for herself, the quiet fantasy that had driven her actions, the belief that she could rewrite reality to suit her own desires. And with that loss came the finality I had been waiting for, the realization that no matter how much she clawed at the past, no matter how many ways she tried to twist the story, she was no longer a part of my world. She was gone. The party came and went without her, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't feeling the weight of her presence lingering in the background. The air was lighter, the laughter louder, the night filled with the warmth of people who genuinely cared, who brought love into my life instead of toxicity disguised as friendship. And as I stood beside James, watching him smile, watching the people around us celebrate him without any of the underlying tension that had plagued me for weeks, I realized that I had done more than just cut ties with someone who had been hurting me. I had reclaimed my peace. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again.